Good evening. I'm Pamela Lorence for NorCal Public Media. Welcome to Questions and Conversation, Living on the Edge. On tonight's live program, we discuss the plight of those in our community living on the margins of the housing crisis, people who are one paycheck away from finding themselves without a place to live. We will be speaking with Will Carruthers, news editor at the North Bay Bohemian and Marin Pacific Sun. We'll report on people living in vans, campers, and recreational vehicles, and one community's controversial solution to the problem. We'll speak with housing administrators Jenna Garcia from Rohnert Park and Stephen Sotomayor from Healdsburg. We'll also examine how people are moving in together to save on housing costs. Finally, join me for a conversation with Tran Nguyen, reporter with San Jose Spotlight. Your questions and comments are the most important part of this program. We want to hear from you now. Call us at 1-800-287-2722 or email your questions to viewer@norcalpublicmedia.org to join the conversation. Some viewers have contacted us via email and even through our social media channels. Here is NorCal's Karen Bell to share some of the questions we have received already. Karen?
Thank you, Pamela. We've been receiving questions and comments from NorCal viewers over the phone, through email, and social media. Our first comment is from Lawrence L., who says, "There are many reasons for people to be homeless, ranging from those who choose being nomads to those who do not have income to afford housing. When there are discussions, they lump all of these folks together, but their situations are very different. No one solution will solve this issue. It would be helpful to have data from the homeless census to delineate some different categories so that solutions could be created for each. Frequently, when housing is created and offered to some groups, they say, 'No way would I live there.' So by throwing more millions of dollars at homelessness will not solve it if people will not occupy what is created." Also, Judy M. emailed us this question. "Has anyone ever interviewed homeless people to determine why they are homeless and where they come from? It seems all we do is count them. We should start with causes, not play catch-up. Something more concrete than poverty or drugs. Why aren't their families helping them? Are they vets or seniors?" Pamela, back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Clearly, this is a complex issue, and people in the community have many opinions, and we'd like to keep hearing them. We'll address as many as we can. And to help us address these questions, I'm joined by Will Carruthers, news editor at the North Bay Bohemian and Marin Pacific Sun. Welcome, Will. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk about this differentiating categories when the homeless count happens. Is that something that could work or should be done?
Yeah, to some extent, it's already happening. There's these generally annual estimates called point-in-time counts. And essentially what happens is every February, a group of volunteers goes out in each county and attempts to, estimate how many people are living on the streets or in cars or in homeless shelters at one given point in time. So there's limits to that, because people can just be homeless for a week and they might show up, or they might not be homeless that day, or, those things. But, so Sonoma County, where I'm based, does split some of that pit count data up. And, one thing to really, one of the questions asked where people come from, and that is something, to be concerned about. But really, when you look at those reports, it's often in Sonoma County in 2020, 88% of the homeless people who responded to the survey said they lived in Sonoma County before they were homeless. So I don't think the sort of, large numbers of nomads are necessarily is happening. But
What's the trend been from the point in time count from, say, 2020 through 2021, and now most recently with the numbers that came out in 2022? What are we seeing in the trends?
Sure, yeah. So the Bay Area County's just released their initial pit count results from February 2022, and they've only released like the top level numbers. So in Sonoma County, the count went up 5% from early 2020 to early 2022. And that's sort of better than people might have been expecting. It is still sort of early in the sense that the county hasn't released the full report or the sort of data underlying it. And as I said, the count can be a little...
It's just a snapshot. It's maybe not the full picture. Is that...
Exactly, yeah.
So there's some limitations there. Let's talk for a second about rental assistance and eviction protection. How does the county stand on that? What are we...
Right. Yeah. So just going back to the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there's been sort of this layering of federal, state, and local protections. And so we had a federal eviction moratorium for a while, and then a state version, and then a county version. And it gets really complicated because they have sort of been expiring at different points and getting strengthened or getting weakened at different levels. So understandably, I think a lot of members of the public don't really have a granular understanding of that. The thing layered on top of that is what's called emergency rental protection assistance money, which is called ERAP. And that was a bunch of money that the federal government and the state government handed down to ultimately counties to give out. And unfortunately, from the perspective of, renters and struggling landlords, that money didn't always go out as fast as it people would have hoped, basically. So that is so in Sonoma County, there is essentially a wait list for that money, the remaining money. And the eviction protections are starting to be weakened. It gets fairly complicated, but there are still some on the books.
So what can municipalities do to strengthen rental protection?
Yeah, so one of the main things that is being pushed in, cities like Petaluma, the Petaluma City Council is considering establishing just cause eviction protections. So essentially, they already exist in places like San Francisco, which has had rent control for a long time.
Right.
But it sort of limits the number of reasons you can be evicted as a tenant. So to those sort of core reasons of damaging the property, being a threat to yourself or others, or sort of falling behind on your rent. So that is one way. And then, we do have a state level Eviction Protection Act, but it does have loopholes in it. And, because of certain laws, it doesn't apply to like single family homes sometimes and housing built after a certain date. So there's a lot of things local communities can do just in the sense of, closing some of those loopholes. And also, I would say just, tracking some of this stuff more closely. Because one of the things I really noticed in the pandemic is that, evictions in places like Sonoma County are really hard to track how many people are actually being evicted. Because if you imagine it as sort of a funnel, there are a lot of people who never get a formal eviction notice or never go to court. You can really only track in the county the people who go to court or actually get evicted by the sheriff's office, which is, the last thing. And we sort of know from studies in other areas that the actual number of evictions happening, informal evictions, people leaving, is much higher than the number that actually result in that sort of sheriff knocking down your door sort of situation.
Wow. When we think about the area of the North Bay, and we're looking at maybe median income versus median home price, what are we seeing there?
Yeah. I think everybody knows housing prices are going up. We're experiencing inflation. Sonoma County has these two reports, one from 2014 and one covering last year, called The Portrait of Sonoma, and that sort of tracks things that, like median income and the number of people who are what's called rent burdened, which means you're spending more than 30% of your income on rent or housing if you have a mortgage. And so while median income has gone up over that 7-year period, the number of people rent burdened has actually gone up considerably as well. So there are now about 52% of renters in Sonoma County are paying more than 30% of their income for housing.
Wow. So would you say, is it fair to say that maybe the key to affordability is to increase the housing stock? We just need to build more houses. Is that really is that foundational?
That's part of it, and that is a thing you hear a lot about, the sort of estimates of how many housing units you need. Another part is just sort of conserving the units you already have. So be that affordable housing or there was a thing in the West County recently of these tenants coming together, and their complaint was that the county permitting department was kicking them out for having things like composting toilets and things like that. And so their argument is let's permit a wider variety of like yurts and tiny homes and things like that. That's getting more creative, but arguably it's like we've been waiting to make enough housing units to balance out the market forces for basically decades now, and these are some interim solutions that can have people housed in the meantime.
Yeah. So how is the housing crisis playing into, the upcoming election season? Are we going to hear a lot about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think pretty much, at the state and local level, it's one of the biggest issues. All of these complaints about housing affordability, clearly. I've noticed generally it does become a debate between, producing more housing and then sort of having those maybe stronger rental protections. So that's a division you can see in politicians sometimes.
Mm-hmm. We just have a comment from a viewer that came in. Paul C. says, with transit between SF and SR, homeless are taking the trip northbound to Santa Rosa. So is transit part of this problem? Thank you.
I mean, that seems a bit anecdotal to me. I'm sure it's happening. I wouldn't say it's part of the problem. Obviously, people do need to get from one place to another, whether you're housed or not.
I want to touch on the alternative solutions people are finding, and I know you had mentioned something very creative happening in Sausalito. Can you briefly tell me about that?
Sure, yeah. So one of our reporters lives in Sausalito, actually, Nikki Silverstein, has been reporting a lot on this transition from these people who are called anchor outs who live on Richardson Bay in boats and have done so for decades. I mean, different people have lived on the bay. And recently the state authority that oversees that bay has started to, try to kick people off the boats, some of which are decaying. And partly as a result of that and just housing prices being what they are, more homeless people have ended up living in Sausalito.
I see.
And they've actually, they've ended up with a city-sanctioned encampment on this tennis court in Sausalito.
Wow. Well, it's interesting to see that people are coming up with solutions, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me tonight. Thank you so much, Will, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. NorCal TV visited Morris Street in Sebastopol, where a community is formed of people living out of their vans, campers, and RVs Neighbors and businesses are not happy with the situation. Cities all over the Bay Area are seeing parked RVs appearing on streets for days, weeks, or months on end. Let's learn more by watching this compelling story.
The homelessness problem is a problem that is not unique to Sebastopol.
We've been dealing with Morris Street and the street campers there for a number of years.
The Morris Street issue, when we pay taxes and we live here, what I don't want to look at is those trailers.
Constituents deserve to have peace and not worry about an RV rolling up and parking in front of their house.
This is a terrible, terribly complicated and painful situation for everybody. You know, they're not there because they want to. They're there because right now they have to be.
So I had to move out and I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I was lucky enough to have someone donate this RV for me to live in. So it works out good. It's all right. I've lived in Sebastopol for 20 years and only been homeless for about a year. The neighbors, the people that live here they're all fine people. We're just like everybody else. A lot of us have lived in this community for many years. Some of us were born here, and then there's some people who are just new here, but they've been shuffled along to the next spot.
I just got it I've had it a month. I mean, if I was a normie or whatever you want to call it, I might be a little intimidated by this area, you know what I mean? Regardless of what the nature of the people really are. I mean, if it's not something that you've seen, and it might bug me too if I was, a long-term homeowner or something here. I don't know how I'd feel about it.
As someone who uses the bike paths and the park, I'm appalled. I understand that they need a place, but whenever I don't want to say I don't want to group them all together. They're individual people with different needs and wants, and I understand that. But we all have a responsibility in society to keep it clean for others, for ourselves. When they took this over and no one said anything, the sidewalk couldn't be used anymore, the bike path couldn't be used anymore. You look at the trash, we give a dumpster over there for people to use. There's trash everywhere. That's what upsets me personally as a concerned citizen. And that's why people don't want this in their neighborhood. It's a conundrum that I think we all know exists in our country, especially with the prices here in California. And I don't have a quick fix, but it doesn't make it okay to take over a community. And I think getting it out from here after seeing what happened is very important.
We don't want to be the biggest slobs in the world, that's for sure. There are people that decide to drive by honking their horn and yelling out disparaging comments. It's embarrassing, it's frustrating, it's demeaning to have people yell things like, you don't belong here, you have no right to be here. I mean, what's the point of doing that to anyone who's already having a hard time?
I don't know if these people never struggled or what, but I don't wish it on anybody to be homeless, but it would be justified if they could understand it, if that's what it would take to make somebody have a little compassion for everybody that's on the street. Everybody has their own story, because that's what we're supposed to do is help each other. I think, that's what I was taught anyway, and it seems like somewhere along the way, people forget that.
The next step in addressing this issue would be a tiny village that would involve a fence around it, that would have services, that would have a manager, that would have a social worker, and that would have rules and regulations.
We've been thinking about this idea for a long time, for a really long time. They're getting the ground ready and they're putting up fences. Once they do that, they're making spots for everybody, about 20 of them. And after that, everyone's going to move in. So we just tow them in and they start living here. It's getting people to be better in life, to actually have a place to stay for a while and put their stuff where it's not going to be stolen so they can actually go get a job.
It's a great neighborhood. People all know each other. It's a great little community. We organized a neighborhood group that did go out and get legal help. There's a very good case. We tried to get an emergency stop, which they did not approve. It's just to let people know it's still going on. My main concern is that this is a big project that was put literally in my backyard, and I was not consulted or even warned about it.
I'm a homeowner less than a half mile away. It's really upsetting. I am asking you to not approve the operational agreement tonight for the Saves RV Village.
It's an absolute outrage. It's so out of touch. You're describing this project as like some sort of Disneyland for homeless people. It's absolutely surreal.
Sebastopol is very generous with very good intentions. I understand there's a need for housing. I get that, especially around here. It seems kind of like an experiment. You know, I'm like a guinea pig in the experiment here. See how it goes.
Welcome back to Questions and Conversation, Living on the Edge. Later in the program, we'll have a report on progress being made on the Morris Street situation in Sebastopol. But first, we ask you to share your thoughts. Send your comments and questions to viewer@norcalpublicmedia.org or call us now at 1-800-287-2722. Here's Karen Bell with a few more questions from our viewers. Karen?
Thank you, Pamela. Sherry W. emailed us this question. Why don't we have rent control in Sebastopol, and not just for new renters? Also, Adolfo M. on social media sent a link to endpovertyincalifornia.org, which offers information about poverty in California in general. Pamela, how do state, county, and city governments address the vision of housing as a human right, and how to increase the supply of affordable housing? Back to you, Pamela.
Thanks, Karen. Big questions, and hopefully we're going to get some answers. Joining me are Jenna Garcia, Housing Administrator for the City of Rohnert Park, and Stephen Sotomayor, Housing Administrator for Healdsburg. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, of course. Jenna, I'm going to start with you. Can you address our viewers' question about rental eviction?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And they're both they're big questions. So yes. I'll do my best.
Okay.
You know, as far as rent control in Sebastopol, which was the first question. So rent control is something that can be passed by local governments. And actually here in Rohnert Park, where I work, in the late 80s, the voters passed rent control for people in mobile home parks. So every year, the rent is limited to a certain percentage based on inflation increase. And there's a cap for that too. So that is in place. There are many cities that have passed rent control, and that's something that the local government would need to consider, and local citizens would have to consider. It is something that can, it is a hard sell for the community, especially landlords, and it can negatively impact smaller landlords too. Yeah. For the second question, and this is a much bigger one, asking about what state, county, and city governments can do to address housing as a human right. I think whoever you ask in California, anyone you ask in California is going to agree that we're in the middle of a housing crisis.
Yes.
And the reality is that the people that are the most impacted are the folks that are on the lower income spectrum. Although we realize that, because it's gotten to be so much more, unattainable to people, so much more expensive for people, especially with the housing market blowing up right now, even middle income folks, are having a hard time being able to afford to live in this area. Housing is not affordable to build. And this is kind of the biggest challenge. If we want to, create more affordable housing and increase the supply, we need to build more of it. And the reality is right now it costs on average about $600,000 per unit to build an apartment complex. So 600,000 times 100 units, that's a really expensive, endeavor. And you have to get people that are willing to invest And people that are, investors want a return on investment. And if you can rent those units, a 1-bedroom unit right now can go for more than $2,500 per month.
Wow.
In Sonoma County. And a low-income unit's about $1,400 a month. So if you're going to build affordable housing, you need to have a lot of money. And the reality is that there's not enough financial resources, certainly at the local government level, to incentivize the amount of affordable housing that we need.
Wow, thank you. Stephen, let's talk about cities. Would you say that they are designed to deal with the issues of housing insecurity?
I don't think that cities were originally made to deal with that specific issue, but largely as the issue became more prevalent, we've had to adapt. And largely that comes from being able to access grants and funding. As Jenna talked about, there's a gap in affordable housing. That the bottom line is that the difference between the rents collected and the difference between actually producing the units is where cities live.
Yeah.
We do gap financing between those, and that's how affordable housing is usually produced. Largely, cities have been mainly focused, if you look at the budgets, the revenues that cities collect is around public safety, public works. These are the kind of core principles that cities do.
Yeah.
Affordable housing and homelessness have become something that we've had to adapt to. And largely where the challenges that we have is that we're largely dependent upon grant funding. And cities that are smaller, more often than not, have to go through other entities to access that funding. And oftentimes the challenges that we find is that funding is not specific to our locality. It is sometimes used more frequently in larger cities that have higher needs, and we tend to get lower amounts. And then finally, sometimes the programs just don't match the actual conditions on the ground. And so we're often in a challenge of either creating our own local financing source. In Healdsburg, we have 2% of our TOT dedicated towards affordable housing, which is a great multiplier when you you use other grants to leverage that funding. But still, it's not enough to be able to meet the needs of our communities. So I think cities are trying rapidly to meet those needs. We plan for those needs. We do our best to produce, but at the end of the day, we do need developers to build housing. We need it on the market end. We need it on the affordable end because it is supply and demand, and we really live behind those numbers.
And I guess speaking to the challenges of funding, what about one-time pots of money versus longer-term strategies? Are you seeing that as an issue?
We often see that in programs that are designed to help those experiencing homelessness. We see one-time funding. Now we've started to see more programs that address both the service as well as the housing needs, and that's been a very encouraging thing. Okay. But yes, one-time funding makes things difficult, especially for our nonprofit providers that are scaling based on these programs. We hire staff, we get them trained, and then the grant funding runs out, and then we scale down. And then we have to scale back up again, which makes it very difficult to be able to create a sustainable program.
Yeah. Jenna, can you talk a little bit about redevelopment for cities?
Yeah, so for several decades, cities had a wonderful tool of financing, which was redevelopment. And here in Rohnert Park, we had a redevelopment agency that invested millions of dollars to help build affordable housing, in particular in between the 90s and early 2000s. And that money was leveraged to get state and federal funds, because what state and federal funds are looking for, they're looking for local backing, and money is one of the best ways to do that. Unfortunately, redevelopment, which came from the increment on property taxes, unfortunately, that went away in 2012 when the state decided to divert it back to the state to help fill the deficit. And we haven't seen it come back. But as Stephen was mentioning earlier, there's been a big move towards, on the state's part and federal grant side, towards having them run all of the programs, and they have stipulations and they know best. Well, there's hundreds of municipalities in the state of California, and every one of them is different. And what redevelopment provided was a real funding source for local governments to fund the kind of housing that met the needs of our own citizens.
So I know that cities oftentimes will have planning requirements. What happens when there isn't the funding to support those requirements? What do cities do? Stephen?
Sure. So I think that there's a number of things that cities can do. One is a local source of funding. Two is to be proactive in getting grants. But Currently we're in the process of updating a housing element, which is an 8-year plan around housing production. It's prescriptive. It's done by the state. We get a certain amount of housing units that we're required to build. The funding is not included. And part of a housing element is you need to demonstrate the capacity to build these units. You don't necessarily need to build them according to the law. But there is more of a crackdown now on making sure that jurisdictions are doing that.
Yeah. All right, we are going to continue this conversation in a moment. So sit tight, I'll be right back. Earlier, we visited Morris Street in Sebastopol, where people are living out of their vans, campers, and RVs. The city of Sebastopol and nonprofit organizations developed a plan to move the community into a safe RV village. The idea is not without local controversy. Watch how one community is seeking possible solutions.
For the most part, everybody's just waiting to go up to the village now. So it's pretty cool. It's actually something that I didn't think that they'd be able to do. The scrutiny of the community wrapped around it almost made it seem like it would be something that would never happen. I don't know, it kind of sounds like fantasy, to have a safe place to go to and have electricity and water and be able to actually, work and save money in a good way. Start to focus on moving forward rather than just the everyday life of Morris Street and trying just to stay out of trouble. I think it's a good model. The community is going to warm up to it, I hope, instead of being so skeptical. And I'm moving up there probably this afternoon. I'm going to head up there.
When I move my RV to the new facility, I will be able to look for a job because I won't have to worry about what's going on with my RV during the day. It'll be in a locked little community, where we keep track of who goes in and out. We already look out for each other, but there's still strange things that go on. So I hope it works out.
Every other day, just a few feet or whatever, Yeah, we'll focus on more important things now.
Right there. Perfect.
Thank you, Doc.
You're welcome.
She said thank you.
You're welcome.
Probably have to redo it. Good feeling. All right, woohoo! Today's the day to start a new chapter. So I'm gonna be receiving safe parking. So I'll try to use it in a good way that helps me. And it's good because I know a lot of people here. In due course, I'll fix my life.
Just have to realize that people are going to be skeptical at first until they see something different. And so hopefully we can show them something different and it won't be all disparaging comments and stuff. So maybe we can give them something to be proud of. I don't know.
been checking out the new scene, and we're just all getting used to the idea of coexisting here for a while, and everybody's kind of readjusting, I think.
Thank you so much, everybody.
It's like one big family of people. So I've been enjoying actually having some sanctuary and not having to worry about cars driving by, and knowing that we're in charge of what we're doing here. You know, all these other things are so much easier to deal with. I'm stoked that I was able to make it here, you know. It's a blessing.
This is good. It's safe. I feel fortunate to be here. Whether it will be a solution that will help people, I think it will. It's supposed to just be transitional. So we're supposed to be working on stuff while we're here to get us to a better spot. You know, it's okay. It's okay.
Having a place like this is really important. As an example, this place could be a cool experiment for the community and for outside this area too. It could be something that could help the homeless situation in California and maybe help with people deciding to do better with their lives.
Welcome back to Questions and Conversation Living on the Edge. Later in the program, we'll report on people moving in together in co-housing arrangements to save on housing costs. But first, we ask you to share your thoughts. Send your comments and questions to viewer@norcalpublicmedia.org or call us now at 1-800-287-2722. Here's Karen Bell with a few more questions from our viewers. Karen?
Thank you, Pamela. Denise H. comments, hoping you'll address the lack of beds and facilities that provide addiction and mental health treatment, both short and long term. Housing costs are definitely a part of the cause, but not the only reason folks are living on the streets. Adolfo M. also sent a link to a frequently asked questions page on californiasocialhousing.org. Can our guests speak about the California Social Housing Act, AB 2053? Pamela, back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Let me turn back to our guests. Stephen, do you want to briefly go over AB 2053?
Sure. From my initial understanding of it is AB 2053 would propose to create a California housing authority, which is something that local counties have as a resource to be able to provide affordable housing opportunities. My understanding is the intent of this would be to create an agency that could address the gaps in what the state mandated requirements are for building affordable housing versus the actual production that cities can do. I think that anything that advances affordable housing is a great idea, but one thing I always am cautious about is local control. If anybody is around me long enough, I'll say local solutions are the right way to go. And, with 481 incorporated cities in California, one solution is not necessarily going to address all the challenges within a community. I think that stands true in Sonoma County as well. I think local solutions are very important. I'd be interested to see how this bill moves forward and what, ultimately becomes of it. And if it advances affordable housing, great. But I'm always cautious around local control and making sure that we have solutions that actually meet the needs of our community.
Thank you. So we had another comment come in from a viewer, Denise H. She asks, how will Sonoma County cities ever be able to provide enough housing when folks from the Bay Area are selling their homes for high prices and purchasing homes in Sonoma County, which drives up the cost of our house inventory? That trend doesn't seem to be waning. So where do we stand on this?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's a totally valid concern. We've seen housing prices increase. Between the summer of 2020 and then, 2021 and now, it just feels like it's going up exponentially. Yeah. There's not one easy answer for how we're going to solve the housing crisis. The reality is we're in a tricky spot where we are not increasing supply to keep up with the demand.
Right.
And we're losing supply at the same time because we have a lot of a lot of units, especially in the North Bay. It's a beautiful place. We have a lot of units that are getting converted into short-term rentals, which means that they're being taken off the market as long-term rentals or potential ownership opportunities, for folks that may want to buy or rent them. So we're losing existing units. We're not adding enough even to begin with, we're going to see a huge spike in cost. There's not one easy solution. Some places like here in Rohnert Park has put in place ordinances to limit short-term rentals as a way to address the loss of units completely, and to ensure that we can meet the needs, of folks that are renting in our community. And obviously building more affordable housing that is income restricted for a long term is another really important tool to ensuring that you have affordable housing for the long term.
With that in mind, though, I don't want to point fingers, but we do get a sense, we hear folks, not in my backyard, the NIMBYism. Is this a trend that you're seeing in the North Bay as well?
I'm happy to take that.
Sure.
I think, and I can speak specifically to Healdsburg, is that we have a very supportive city council when it comes to affordable housing. They've made money available for it. They support programs that are addressing it. And I think that's great. What I think that we see is that there's been a sea change in how we look at housing. If you think about it from a long period of time, living in downtown used to be the thing, then it wasn't, now it is again, right? And so we see changes in how we're approaching this. But I think one area that would be important to look at, is to start looking at affordable housing is not affordable in the sense of that it's just specifically for a certain income, but it's the people that we work with every day. It's our teachers, it's the construction workers, it's your city employees. It's people that are not making the wages that can buy the $1 million home in Sebastopol as the average, or the $1.2 million home in Healdsburg. And so we got to think of it more as bringing families back, and that affordable housing really fills that need because a healthy community has a mix of incomes in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you seeing the same trend in Rohnert Park?
Yeah, and like what Stephen was describing in Healdsburg, our city council is very supportive of housing and, has been for decades, even when it wasn't popular to be supportive of building more housing. And because it takes sometimes a decade plus for housing to actually get developed, we're seeing some really major, large developments in the city that are coming to fruition now, like University District and SoMo, and for folks that are familiar with the area. I'll hand it back to you then.
Thank you. This is great. I appreciate you both being here and spending this time and sharing this very valuable information. We could probably go on for several hours discussing this. It's a very big topic, but thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Pamela.
Yeah, of course. San Mateo County's Human Investment Project, known as HIP Housing, has actively promoted home sharing as a housing solution for decades. They help match individuals seeking housing with people who have a room or accessory dwelling unit, ADU, to rent. Let's watch how HIP works to break the cycle of poverty and end homelessness.
On the peninsula, finding a reasonably priced home has been a challenge for years. One agency that has been here to help is HIP Housing, short for Human Investment Project. It's an affordable housing nonprofit that serves residents of San Mateo County.
The needs in our county for housing transcends decades. In fact, being in the community for 50 years, the same types of challenges that we're facing now, we were facing 20, 30 years ago. Just housing challenges in general just haven't really dissipated here in this community with, great job growth, but not enough housing to meet the demand. Rents are incredibly high. In order to afford a one-bedroom apartment here in the county, you need to make over $100,000 a year.
Since 1972, HIP has been implementing a solution taking hold around the country: home sharing.
So HIP Housing's role is to connect individuals with each other, and we help match individuals who have an extra room with someone who is in need of a room to rent.
Home sharing is a creative way to make use of existing housing stock. We have many, many thousands of homes here in the community with many thousands of empty bedrooms.
The home providers are individuals who have an extra room in their home. Someone who is interested in sharing common spaces like the living room, the kitchen, sometimes the bathroom. There is no typical home share. You'll see that we have a variety of individuals living, working, or going to school here. Some of them can be working professionals, others can be seniors.
The key to the program's success has been the caring team of coordinators that set up and monitor home sharing matches.
Right, team. I think it's time to talk about matches.
Ms. Bronson, what about the match with Sandra and Tammy?
Sandra and Tammy in Daly City, it's going really well. I checked in with Sandra.
Does anybody have an update on Jim and Mike's match in San Mateo?
We spoke with Michael and he said the match is going very well.
Michael McDonald is a home provider in San Mateo.
I grew up in San Mateo and I got this house 4 years ago and I like it. It's a really nice place. I ran out of room and Jim is in it.
And I had found Mike through HIP Housing. It just sounded like a great fit for me. So I never thought about trying to get a one bedroom or like a duplex by myself. I think it's incredibly too expensive. This is California, not Texas.
Jim, sit down over here. Let's have some orange. They screen the people. So for me, I'm not out there advertising and having just a load of people either coming through here and you don't know who they are.
Mike just told me the basics. What I just need is for you just to respect the property. The very simple basic rules: clean up after yourself, have the rent on time.
Nothing better than a nice clean stove.
I gotta tell people they can use the kitchen because they gotta eat. Whether they do or not, that's their choice, but at least it's an option, you know. Same thing with laundry. It's like, it's here, why not use it, you know?
Late at night, just go in and work out here in the backyard. So, see, I got it.
This guy's built, man. He's working out all the time. And Jim is just a great guy, just like the perfect tenant. Good fit, definitely good fit. We're both football fans, both 49er fans. He doesn't like Dallas, so it's okay, you know, stuff like that. So it's a good thing.
Many of our matches do become friends and they keep in touch even after they've decided to end their match. And it's actually been a couple of matches able to form such a strong relationship that they decide to get married. And it's a rare occurrence, but it does happen.
Well, Jim and I are not going to get married.
No.
I can tell you that.
I mean, it's very relaxed. Here, this is the first time I feel like I'm coming home. But this is the first time in years I feel like I have a home to come to.
Normalizing home sharing and getting folks interested, those are the outcomes that we all hope and strive for.
I know lots of people see a lot of homeless people on the street and they ask themselves, well, what can I do? And one of the things that you can do is open your home to someone who may be needing housing.
We have had, of course, thousands and thousands of people who are matched together. I think what we're most proud of is obviously being able to make a difference here in the county.
Welcome back to Questions and Conversation Living on the Edge. Remember, you can send your comments and questions to viewer@norcalpublicmedia.org or call us now at 1-800-287-2722. And I want to thank Stephen S. and Ariella S., who both sent in questions and comments, but I had to say goodbye to my guests, so we hope to address them on another show. In the South Bay, I was able to speak with a reporter well acquainted with the housing challenges there. While some seeking housing in the Bay Area are fortunate to have found alternatives, not everyone is as lucky. And in the South Bay, the housing crisis has particularly taken a toll in the city of San Jose, where the homeless population has increased 11% during the pandemic. To explain what's going on and share some information about that is Tran Nguyen, a reporter for San Jose Spotlight. She's been covering this issue. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me.
The high cost of housing is really an issue, and I think it's most visibly represented at the large encampment at Mineta San Jose International Airport. What's happening over there?
Yeah, essentially this encampment has grown to be one of the largest camp in the Bay Area, where several hundreds people are living in the sprawling area of 40 acres near the airport. The city of San Jose is actually under a federal deadline to clear out this location by the end of September. This has caused a lot of challenges, and obviously the city and the county has focused a lot of attention and resources to help people at this site. Still, we saw that people at the site is living in a very squalid condition. You know, they are infested by rats, which chew through everything and anything that is their property. We also have, you know, at this point, it has become quite unlivable over there just because of the violence and a lot of things that come with living on the streets. But the question is where are people going to go, you know, if the city clear out this location? So the city is having a couple of projects, including housing projects and safe parking programs that it hopes are going to come online by the deadline so people can have some space, some places to go. Yeah. The other aspect that is getting a lot of attention is interim housing, which means transitional. These are supposed to be temporary, where people who are ready to get help, they can, you know, enter these spaces, and this has manifested to become tiny homes communities. Like you've seen, there's several in San Jose, quick build, prefabricated model housing. These are cheaper and faster to build, and they have proven some success in the area. The other thing that is very, very crucial, and that's also going to play into the prevention part of the strategy, is permanent supportive housing. Mm-hmm. This is very crucial for people who might not be able to take care of themselves, people who might not be able to get back into the workforce after they find stable living condition, people who might live with disability or mental health issues. You know, these kind of housing have staff or workers on site that would help providing people with various services. Some people just need, you know, a ride to go get their Social Security card, right. But others might have, you know, medical issues where they need somebody to come in and take care of them on a daily basis. And permanent supportive housing is also very great because it's affordable for people who don't have any other income other than their Social Security checks. The goal is to bring the total number of interim housing units to 1,000 units. Right. So that means the city has to add in 600 units by the end of this year. That's very ambitious. The city is also using Project Home Key, which is a state initiative to help local cities and counties to convert underutilized motels and hotels to convert them into interim housing. So that's all part of the San Jose's plan to address this issue.
I want to focus more now on prevention.
The county and the city has made great strides with prevention. Santa Clara County actually did a progress report earlier this year showing that it has cut the inflow by 30% annually. In more than 90% of the cases, people who are facing homelessness only need $5,000 on average to avoid falling into that situation. It's very costly and challenging to get people out of homelessness than to prevent people to fall into homelessness. So emergency rental assistance, you know, helping people pay their rent for a month or two to basically help people get back on their feet. You know, opportunities like job trainings and job fairs are also very helpful.
So renters in San Jose pay the second highest on average rent in the country.
Mm-hmm. This is a very expensive area to live and to thrive. One thing about
housing here is, it's land costs so much
Yeah.
that it's very difficult to build housing in the first place. Construction costs, such as lumber and labor,
Right.
those are also very high costs. And to encourage developers to build more affordable housing, the city has done a number of initiatives to ease the process. These kind of things really was done to really address the issue of too many red tapes and to incentivize developers to build affordable housing in the area. The city has a goal of building 25,000 housing units by the end of 2023. This includes 15,000 units in market rate housing and 10,000 units in affordable housing.
Would you say that city leaders and advocates are seeing progress?
I would say the county actually recently released its homeless tally in the first time in the last 3 years, so during the pandemic. And Santa Clara County saw a 3% increase in the population, and officials are counting it as victory because the last time that they did a tally, they saw a 40-something% increase. So it's quite a difference in the population. But I would also like to point out, although it's only a 3% increase, there's still at least 10,000 people who are considered homeless. Housing projects are coming online. There's more efforts to put into initiatives like safe parking, and tiny homes communities are, being championed, but progress is slow.
Tran, thank you so much for joining me today to share this information.
Of course, thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us for Questions and Conversation, Living on the Edge. NorCal Public Media thanks everyone for your insightful questions and comments during the program tonight, and we will continue to report on affordable housing issues in the Bay Area. You can continue to engage in the conversation online at norcalpublicmedia.org and on our social media channels. Special thanks to La Mejor 104.1 for providing real-time Spanish language audio translation of this live special. I'm Pamela Lorence on behalf of myself, Karen Bell, and NorCal Public Media. Thanks for watching and good night.